The sea is almost invisible at first. It exists only as movement beneath darkness, a slow lifting and lowering that seems to extend beyond every horizon. The night wind carries the scent of fuel and salt. Somewhere nearby, something large groans beneath the water. Metal shifts against pressure. Air escapes from compartments no one can see. Then even those sounds begin to fade, swallowed by distance and the steady breathing of the ocean itself. A few scattered lights remain upon the surface. Some drift. Some vanish. Others hang uncertainly above the waves before disappearing into the black water below. Around them float fragments of a world that only hours earlier had possessed shape, routine, and purpose. Pieces of wood rise and fall. Empty containers bump gently together. A life jacket turns slowly in the current. The sea accepts everything with equal patience. Men cling to rafts they did not expect to need. Others grip floating debris while searching the darkness for familiar voices. Some still look toward the place where the ship disappeared, as though enough concentration might reverse what has already happened. The habit of belonging to a vessel is difficult to abandon. Even after steel has sunk beneath the waves, the mind continues to search for decks, bulkheads, engines, and routines that no longer exist. You watch the darkness settle around them. Above, the sky remains crowded with stars. Below, the sea appears endless. Between those two vast spaces float small groups of survivors who possess almost nothing except what they managed to carry with them into the water. The war, which only hours earlier seemed enormous and immediate, suddenly feels very far away. Aircraft, fleets, commands, and campaigns still exist somewhere beyond the horizon. Yet here, surrounded by open water, survival has become smaller and more personal. A warship, a merchant vessel, a troop transport, a submarine tender. The exact type of ship matters less than what follows its loss. Throughout the conflicts of the 20th century, thousands of sailors, soldiers, civilians, and merchant seamen discovered that surviving a sinking was only the beginning of a much longer ordeal. Histories often preserve the moment of destruction. Torpedoes strike. Bombs fall. Hulls break apart. Distress signals are transmitted into the night. Such events fit naturally into timelines and official records. The drifting that follows is harder to record. Days spent waiting rarely leave dramatic traces behind. The sea does not always provide clear milestones. One sunrise resembles another. Clouds arrive and depart without explanation. Time stretches and contracts according to thirst, exhaustion, and uncertainty. For those who remain afloat, survival becomes less a sequence of events and more a condition through which every hour must be carefully navigated. The ocean has always possessed this ability to alter perspective. Distances become difficult to judge. Scale becomes uncertain. A passing cloud can seem immense. A distant aircraft can appear close enough to touch before disappearing again into the horizon. A single cup of water acquires more importance than machinery worth millions. Entire futures begin to depend upon weather patterns, currents, and chance encounters occurring far beyond human control. Around the drifting survivors, the sea continues exactly as it did before the sinking occurred. Swells roll across vast distances. Fish move through unseen depths. Wind reshapes the surface into patterns that vanish almost immediately after they form. Nature offers neither cruelty nor kindness. It simply continues. For those floating upon it, however, everything has changed. The routines that once governed daily life aboard ship have disappeared. Watches, meal schedules, maintenance duties, and familiar sleeping quarters belong to another world now. In their place comes uncertainty. Not dramatic uncertainty, but a quieter kind. An uncertainty measured in hours, then days, and sometimes even longer. An uncertainty that settles into every decision, every conversation, and every glance toward the horizon. Tonight, the survivors cannot yet know how long they will remain here. They cannot know whether rescue vessels are already searching. They cannot know whether someone received their distress signal. They cannot know whether dawn will bring hope or disappointment. For now, there is only darkness, cold water, and the slow realization that the ship beneath them is gone. And the sea is very large. If you enjoy these calm journeys into the overlooked corners of history, consider subscribing and joining us for future explorations of the lives that unfolded behind the headlines, beneath the uniforms, and far from the centers of power. You're listening to Echoes of War. The first hours after a sinking are often remembered in fragments. A face illuminated by a flashlight. The smell of smoke drifting across black water. A hand reaching from one raft to another. The distant sound of a whistle. Details survive because the mind searches desperately for something stable to hold. Yet as the years pass, many survivors describe another memory that remains equally powerful. It is not a specific event. It is a feeling. The feeling of understanding, little by little, that the familiar world has vanished. A ship is more than steel. For those who live aboard it, even briefly, it becomes a floating environment governed by routine and structure. Corridors lead somewhere. Meals arrive at expected times. Equipment serves known purposes. Every sound carries meaning. The vibration of engines beneath the deck becomes part of ordinary existence. Sailors learn to sleep beside machinery, weather, and motion because those forces become predictable companions. When a vessel sinks, those invisible certainties sink with it. The survivors do not merely lose transportation. They lose the framework through which daily life was organized. In the hours that follow, the smallest decisions suddenly require attention. Where should people sit? How much water remains? Who is injured? Which direction is the wind carrying them? What should be saved? What should be discarded? Questions once answered automatically now demand careful consideration. You can observe this transformation in accounts gathered from every ocean touched by modern conflict. The Atlantic, the Pacific, the Arctic, the Mediterranean. Different wars, different uniforms, different languages. Yet the experience often begins in remarkably similar ways. Individuals who belong to large military or civilian systems find themselves reduced to small groups drifting across enormous spaces. The machinery of war recedes into the distance. The machinery of survival moves into its place. Some survivors entered lifeboats designed for emergencies. Others relied upon inflatable rafts. Some clung to wreckage. A few found themselves floating alone. Conditions varied enormously, yet one reality remained consistent. Rescue was rarely immediate. Even during major naval operations, locating survivors could be extraordinarily difficult. Aircraft searched vast areas. Escort vessels followed incomplete reports. Weather concealed evidence. Currents carried rafts away from expected positions. Sometimes rescuers passed surprisingly close without seeing those they sought. Sometimes rescue arrived quickly. Sometimes it did not. The uncertainty between loss and rescue became its own landscape. Within that landscape, ordinary human behavior often acquired unexpected importance. Someone remembered to secure supplies before abandoning ship. Someone organized watches through the night. Someone reassured frightened companions. Someone shared water despite personal risk. Such actions rarely appear prominently in strategic histories, yet they shaped countless outcomes upon the sea. The drifting survivors gradually discovered that endurance depended upon more than physical resources. Food mattered. Water mattered. Shelter mattered. Yet survival also depended upon memory, cooperation, patience, and the ability to continue believing that the horizon might eventually deliver help. These qualities cannot be stored in lifeboats or packed into emergency kits. They emerge slowly under pressure. As dawn approaches across the dark water, the survivors do not yet understand the full shape of the journey ahead. They cannot see the storms that may arrive. They cannot measure the days that may pass. They cannot know how their bodies and minds will change beneath the constant presence of sun, wind, salt, and uncertainty. What awaits them is not simply a story about disaster. It is a story about adaptation. A story about routine constructed from almost nothing. A story about endurance measured not in dramatic moments, but in repeated ordinary decisions made beneath extraordinary conditions. Tonight, the ocean remains dark around them. Small groups drift through the swells while stars shine above waters that seem without end. Somewhere beyond the horizon, ships continue their voyages. Commands continue issuing orders. Wars continue unfolding. Yet here, suspended between disappearance and rescue, another quieter history begins to take shape. The sea rises and falls beneath the rafts. Voices grow quieter. The darkness begins to soften along the eastern horizon. Around the survivors, the first light of morning slowly approaches, revealing a world that looks very different from the one they left behind only hours earlier. And with that light comes the first true understanding of what remains. The water after the ship. Morning arrives gradually. The darkness retreats without urgency, revealing an ocean that appears almost peaceful. The violence of the previous night has largely vanished from view. The waves move with steady rhythm beneath a pale sky. Sunlight begins spreading across the water in long silver bands. For a brief moment, it becomes possible to imagine that nothing extraordinary has happened here at all. Then details emerge. A lifeboat riding low in the swells. An inflatable raft crowded with exhausted survivors. Debris scattered across the surface. A section of wooden decking drifting alone. Oil spreading in thin patterns across the water. The sea has hidden the ship itself, but traces of its passing remain. Many survivors experience a peculiar sense of disbelief during these first hours of daylight. Night concealed the scale of the loss. Darkness reduced the world to immediate concerns, staying afloat, finding companions, avoiding panic. Morning changes that perspective. With visibility comes distance. With distance comes understanding. The horizon appears impossibly large. Those who spent the night listening for rescue now search every direction. Eyes move repeatedly across the water. Small clouds become potential aircraft. Reflections become imagined vessels. Every shape attracts attention. Hope attaches itself to anything unusual. You watch this pattern repeat across countless accounts. Human attention becomes tied to the horizon. The mind begins conducting constant searches even while the body rests. A distant object appears. Expectations rise. The object reveals itself as driftwood, a wave crest, or a cloud. The cycle begins again. Meanwhile, practical concerns demand immediate action. Water must be accounted for. Injuries must be examined. Equipment must be gathered and organized. Those fortunate enough to possess emergency supplies quickly discover how valuable ordinary objects have become. A small container of fresh water may represent several days of life. A signaling mirror may become more important than any weapon carried aboard the lost ship. A piece of canvas capable of providing shade can alter the experience of an entire raft. The transformation is swift. During the previous day, many of these individuals belonged to vast military organizations supported by fleets, ports, depots, and supply networks stretching across continents. Now they measure resources in handfuls, cups, and individual items. Large systems have been replaced by immediate realities. The scale of existence contracts dramatically. Physical exhaustion also begins making itself known. Adrenaline carried many survivors through the sinking itself. Urgency delayed the full arrival of fatigue. Morning removes some of that protection. Muscles ache from hours spent clinging to ropes, debris, or raft edges. Salt water irritates skin and eyes. Bruises become visible. Cuts that seemed minor during darkness begin attracting attention. For some, injuries prove far more serious. Burns from explosions. Fractures sustained during evacuation. Shrapnel wounds. Exposure to fuel and oil. The conditions under which medical care must now occur bear little resemblance to hospitals or shipboard infirmaries. Treatment often consists of improvisation, patience, and conservation. Every bandage matters. Every decision regarding supplies carries consequences. Yet even under such circumstances, routine begins forming. Someone counts survivors. Someone inventories equipment. Someone records observations about weather and direction. Someone assumes responsibility without formally being assigned the task. The emergence of structure is almost instinctive. Human beings tend to organize themselves when confronted with uncertainty. Not because organization guarantees success, but because it creates a sense of movement within situations where control is limited. As the sun climbs higher, the ocean reveals both beauty and indifference. The water shifts between shades of blue and silver. Flying fish occasionally break the surface. Clouds drift slowly across enormous skies. Nature offers scenes that might appear tranquil to an observer aboard a peaceful vessel. For those drifting below, the same scenery carries different meanings. Every hour without rescue becomes noticeable. Every passing aircraft matters. Every change in weather demands attention. The sea remains beautiful. It also remains unconcerned. The survivors are beginning to understand both truths at once. As the morning continues, the survivors begin to separate the urgent from the important. During the sinking itself, nearly every action carried immediate consequences. Decisions had to be made within seconds. There was little opportunity for reflection. Now the pace changes. The ocean imposes a slower rhythm. Urgency remains present, but it unfolds across hours rather than moments. This shift requires a different kind of endurance. The first conversations often revolve around information. Who was seen leaving the ship? Which lifeboats launched successfully? Whether a distress signal was transmitted? How many vessels might be operating nearby? Such discussions serve practical purposes, but they also satisfy another need. They help transform confusion into narrative. Human beings naturally seek sequences. They want to understand how one event led to another. Even when answers remain incomplete, the effort itself provides comfort. Around the rafts and boats, fragments of memory begin to circulate. One survivor recalls hearing the explosion before anyone else. Another remembers seeing lights fail along a corridor. Someone describes the angle at which the vessel settled into the water. These recollections are exchanged cautiously, as though each might contain a missing piece of a larger picture. Yet no single account captures the whole experience. The sinking has already begun dividing into individual memories. You notice how quickly the lost ship acquires the qualities of a remembered place. Only hours have passed, yet people already speak of it as something belonging to the past. They remember familiar compartments, regular duties, favorite corners of the deck. Small details emerge unexpectedly. A particular mug left behind. A hammock that swung gently during rough weather. The sound of machinery heard through a bulkhead at night. Memory rarely preserves only the dramatic moments. More often, it preserves ordinary ones. The sea encourages such reflection. There is little to distract the mind from itself. Open water provides space not only around the survivors, but within their thoughts. Long stretches of observation create opportunities for recollection. The rhythm of the waves becomes a kind of background against which memories rise and fall. At the same time, practical realities continue asserting themselves. The sun climbs steadily higher, bringing heat that many survivors had not fully anticipated. During the night, cold dominated attention. Now sunlight introduces a different challenge. Skin exposed for long periods begins to burn. Eyes strain beneath constant brightness. Surfaces grow hot to the touch. Shade becomes a valuable resource, and those fortunate enough to possess canvas coverings or improvised shelters quickly appreciate their importance. Water, however, remains the central concern. Food can often be postponed. Comfort can be postponed. Fresh water cannot. Survivors begin calculating consumption with extraordinary care. Containers are inspected repeatedly. Estimates are made and revised. Small amounts are distributed according to plans that must balance present needs against uncertain futures. Every sip acquires significance. Every decision regarding rationing carries emotional weight. These calculations reveal another transformation taking place. Time itself is changing. Aboard ship, time was measured through watches, duties, meals, and schedules. The day possessed structure imposed by the institution surrounding it. Here, structure must be created deliberately. Sunrise and sunset become primary markers. Water distribution becomes an event. The appearance of clouds becomes meaningful. The passage of time begins attaching itself to survival rather than routine. For many survivors, the first afternoon is when rescue feels most likely. The logic appears reasonable. Distress signals may have been received. Search aircraft may already be operating. Nearby vessels may have altered course. The horizon receives constant attention. Eyes return to it again and again, even when experience suggests caution. Occasionally, something does appear. A distant speck. A faint sound. A shape breaking the line where sea meets sky. The reaction is immediate. Heads turn. Conversations stop. Individuals rise as much as limited space permits. For a few moments, anticipation fills the raft. Then uncertainty returns. The object proves too distant. The sound fades. The shape disappears. Such disappointments rarely arrive with dramatic force. Instead, they accumulate gradually. Each one removes a small amount of confidence while leaving hope intact. The survivors continue watching because the alternative is impossible. To stop watching would be to surrender a connection with the possibility of rescue. The afternoon light softens. Shadows lengthen across the water. The sea remains in motion, carrying rafts and lifeboats through currents no one can fully measure. Distances slowly change. Debris fields spread apart. Some groups of survivors drift beyond sight of one another. Others remain close enough to exchange signals or brief conversations across the swells. The world continues becoming smaller. Not because the ocean shrinks, but because attention narrows. Survival encourages focus upon immediate realities. The next ration. The next weather change. The next nightfall. Grand questions about campaigns, strategies, and outcomes recede into the background. Those matters still exist somewhere beyond the horizon, yet they possess little power here. As evening approaches, a quiet understanding settles over many of the survivors. Rescue may not arrive today. The realization is rarely spoken aloud. It does not need to be. The lowering sun communicates the message clearly enough. Another night is approaching. Another period of darkness. Another stretch of uncertainty upon open water. Yet alongside that realization comes something else. People begin preparing. Supplies are secured. Positions are adjusted. Plans are discussed. The routines of survival, still fragile and incomplete, are beginning to take shape. The survivors are no longer responding solely to disaster. They are adapting to a new condition. The lost ship belongs to yesterday now. The sea belongs to the present. And as the first day draws toward its end, the drifting communities scattered across the water begin the slow process of learning how to live within it. The small society afloat. The second morning arrives with fewer surprises. The ocean still stretches endlessly in every direction. The sun still rises from a horizon that appears unchanged. The rafts and lifeboats still rise and fall upon the same swells that carried them through the previous day. Yet something subtle has shifted. The survivors wake not as passengers escaping a disaster, but as inhabitants of a temporary world. During the first day, attention was consumed by loss. During the second, attention begins turning toward maintenance. A drifting raft cannot be left to manage itself. Equipment requires inspection. Ropes loosen. Containers shift position. Water collects where it should not. Small tears appear in canvas. Exposure affects both materials and people. The sea applies pressure continuously, never dramatically enough to command attention, yet never ceasing long enough to be ignored. You watch individuals assume responsibilities that often emerge without formal discussion. One person develops a habit of checking supplies every few hours. Another becomes responsible for observing weather. Someone else monitors the condition of injured survivors. Leadership begins to take shape not through rank alone, but through usefulness. The ocean cares little for organizational charts. What matters here is reliability. The process unfolds gradually. Most survivors still carry habits from their previous lives aboard ship. Naval discipline, merchant routines, military procedures, and ordinary civilian instincts all remain present. These habits provide valuable structure. Men who spent years operating within organized systems often recreate portions of those systems almost automatically. Watches are established. Duties are assigned. Expectations are communicated. Such measures cannot eliminate uncertainty, but they reduce disorder. The raft begins behaving like a tiny community. This transformation appears repeatedly throughout maritime survival accounts. Human beings possess a remarkable tendency to construct society even under the most restricted circumstances. Given a limited space and a shared challenge, routines emerge. Rules emerge. Informal customs emerge. What begins as a collection of individuals slowly becomes a group. The change is not always obvious from moment to moment. A water container receives a designated location. A signal mirror is entrusted to a particular person. Certain hours become associated with specific tasks. These are small developments, easily overlooked. Yet taken together, they create predictability. Predictability becomes valuable because it reduces the mental burden imposed by uncertainty. Meanwhile, the sea continues offering reminders of its scale. Flying fish occasionally scatter across the surface. Seabirds appear briefly before vanishing into the distance. Clouds form and dissolve above immense skies. The natural world operates according to rhythms entirely separate from human concerns. Survivors observe these patterns closely because they represent some of the few changes available to watch. Weather becomes especially important. A cluster of clouds may suggest rain. A shift in wind direction may alter the movement of the raft. Calm conditions may preserve energy. Rough conditions may threaten equipment and morale alike. People begin studying the sky with increasing attention, searching for clues hidden within ordinary atmospheric changes. For those responsible for supplies, water remains a constant source of concern. The calculations performed on the first day continue. Estimates are adjusted according to consumption and circumstance. Every container is inspected carefully. Any possibility of collecting rainwater receives serious consideration. Discussions surrounding rationing occur repeatedly, sometimes openly, sometimes in quiet conversations between those attempting to manage resources responsibly. The challenge lies not only in scarcity, but in uncertainty. If rescue were guaranteed tomorrow, decisions would be simple. If rescue were guaranteed next month, decisions would be different but equally clear. The difficulty arises because no one knows. Resources must therefore be measured against an unknown future. Every choice exists between competing possibilities. You can sense how this uncertainty shapes behavior. People conserve energy when possible. Movements become deliberate. Tasks are performed carefully. The survivors are learning that endurance often depends upon restraint rather than effort. In ordinary life, action frequently solves problems. At sea, unnecessary action may create new ones. Hours pass beneath strengthening sunlight. Conversation rises and falls. Some individuals speak frequently. Others retreat into long periods of observation. Silence becomes a natural component of daily existence. Not an uncomfortable silence, but one shaped by limited surroundings and repeated thoughts. There are only so many things to discuss. Eventually attention returns to the horizon, the weather, and the slow movement of time itself. Memory also begins occupying a larger role. With immediate danger temporarily reduced, minds drift toward places far beyond the ocean. Families appear in recollection. Homes return in fragments. Ordinary routines once taken for granted acquire unexpected clarity. A kitchen window. A railway station. A familiar street. The sound of rain against a roof. Such memories arrive without invitation. The sea encourages this inward movement. Its vastness leaves room for thought. Long stretches of observation create opportunities for reflection. While bodies remain confined to limited spaces, minds travel enormous distances. Yet memory serves more than emotional purposes. It also helps preserve identity. Survivors remind one another who they were before the sinking. They tell stories. They share details. They reconstruct portions of lives temporarily interrupted by circumstance. These exchanges strengthen connections within the group while maintaining connections to worlds beyond the horizon. As midday approaches, The raft drifts steadily beneath a bright sky. Nothing dramatic occurs. No rescue aircraft appear. No ships emerge from the distance. No sudden developments alter the situation. And yet the condition itself is changing. The survivors are beginning to settle into survival. What felt temporary yesterday is beginning to feel routine today. The realization remains incomplete, but it grows more visible with every passing hour. The raft is no longer merely a refuge from disaster. It is becoming a place where life must continue. By the afternoon of the second day, the raft possesses a rhythm. It is not a comfortable rhythm, nor a permanent one, but it exists nonetheless. People begin waking and resting according to patterns rather than exhaustion alone. Certain individuals habitually inspect supplies. Others watch the horizon. Others remain close to the injured. What began as improvisation slowly acquires consistency. The survivors may not know how long they will remain at sea, yet they are already shaping their days around the possibility that it could be longer than anyone wishes to imagine. The creation of routine serves purposes beyond efficiency. Routine occupies the mind. It divides an uncertain future into manageable portions. A man responsible for checking water containers can focus on the next inspection rather than the unknown days ahead. Someone assigned to observe weather can concentrate upon clouds rather than possibilities. Small responsibilities create boundaries around anxiety. You can observe this principle across many environments touched by conflict. Prison camps, isolated outposts, besieged cities, and drifting lifeboats often generate similar responses. Human beings confronted with uncertainty frequently create structure where they can. The structure may be fragile. It may be improvised. Yet it provides a sense of continuity that pure waiting cannot offer. Waiting, after all, contains its own dangers. The body can remain occupied while the mind wanders toward darker possibilities. Questions arise naturally. Were search aircraft dispatched? Has anyone reported the sinking accurately? How far has the current carried the raft? Such questions rarely produce answers. Left unattended, they can consume entire days. For this reason, practical tasks acquire unusual value. A rope requiring adjustment becomes meaningful. A piece of equipment needing repair becomes important. Even simple maintenance provides evidence that action remains possible. The sea may control many circumstances, but not all of them. Throughout the afternoon, sunlight continues pressing down upon the raft. Clothing dries stiff with salt. Skin becomes increasingly irritated. Lips crack. Eyes narrow against the brightness reflected from every wave. The ocean's beauty remains undeniable, yet prolonged exposure reveals its cost. Conditions that might appear serene from a passing vessel feel very different when experienced hour after hour without shelter. Water continues to occupy nearly every calculation. The survivors drink carefully. Discussions regarding rationing become more precise. Some groups establish fixed distributions. Others adjust according to circumstance. There is rarely a perfect solution because the future remains unknown. Every decision balances present comfort against future necessity. The emotional burden of such choices should not be underestimated. A cup of water becomes more than a resource. It becomes a measure of optimism. To distribute generously implies confidence in rescue. To distribute conservatively acknowledges the possibility of a longer ordeal. Every ration therefore carries both practical and psychological weight. Meanwhile, relationships within the raft continue evolving. Most groups contain individuals of different ages, backgrounds, and temperaments. Some naturally assume leadership. Others offer quiet support. Some cope through conversation. Others withdraw into observation. Under ordinary circumstances, such differences might remain unremarkable. Within a confined floating community, they become highly visible. The sea acts as a kind of magnifying lens. Small acts of kindness gain significance. Irritations become more noticeable. Shared jokes acquire greater value than they might elsewhere. A person capable of maintaining calm during difficult moments often becomes as important as someone possessing technical expertise. Morale, though difficult to measure, influences survival in countless subtle ways. You watch these communities gradually learn one another's strengths. Someone proves skilled at organizing supplies. Someone else remembers practical survival advice learned years earlier. Another possesses an ability to reassure others without making unrealistic promises. These contributions help sustain the group because survival rarely depends upon a single quality. It depends upon many small efforts working together. As the afternoon lengthens, weather begins attracting renewed attention. Clouds gather far beyond the horizon. At first they appear insignificant. The ocean is full of distant weather. Yet people continue watching. Rain could provide relief from thirst. Wind could alter drift patterns. Storms could introduce entirely new challenges. Every change in the sky carries potential consequences. The survivors have already begun measuring the world differently. On board a ship, weather often existed as background information. It influenced operations, but remained something observed from relative safety. Afloat in small craft, weather becomes immediate. Clouds are no longer scenery. They are possibilities. Wind is no longer atmosphere. It is a force capable of reshaping daily existence. Toward evening, the light softens once more. The harsh brilliance of midday fades into warmer tones. Shadows stretch across the surface of the sea. Conversations become quieter. Fatigue accumulates gradually. Not the exhaustion of crisis, but the slower fatigue created by constant exposure, limited movement, interrupted sleep, and unending vigilance. The survivors are beginning to understand another truth about drifting. Survival is not sustained through extraordinary moments alone. It is sustained through repetition, through countless small decisions made hour after hour, through routines maintained despite uncertainty, through responsibilities carried even when no one can say whether they will matter tomorrow. The raft rises and falls gently beneath the evening sky. Supplies are checked once more. Watches are discussed. Eyes scan the horizon before darkness returns. Around them, the ocean remains vast and indifferent, yet within this small floating world something durable has begun to emerge. A community. Fragile, temporary, and vulnerable, but a community nonetheless. And as the second night approaches, that fragile structure may prove as important as any resource stored within the raft itself. Beneath the sun and salt. By the third day, the sea no longer feels unfamiliar. Its movements have become predictable enough to anticipate. The rise of each swell produces a familiar sensation beneath the raft. The changing color of the water throughout the day becomes expected. Even the horizon, immense and featureless as it appears, acquires a strange familiarity through constant observation. Yet while the survivors become accustomed to the ocean begins imposing its costs. The first days after a sinking are often sustained by urgency, discipline, and hope. Human beings possess reserves that emerge during crisis. The body tolerates discomfort. The mind focuses upon immediate objectives. Adrenaline and purpose carry people through circumstances that might otherwise seem impossible. Such reserves, however, are not endless. Exposure works slowly. Unlike explosions, storms, or combat, it rarely announces itself dramatically. It arrives through accumulation. 1 hour becomes another. Sunlight continues falling upon the same skin. Salt water continues drying upon the same clothing. Wind continues drawing moisture from the body. The effects gather quietly until they can no longer be ignored. Many survivors begin the day with increasing physical discomfort. Lips crack more deeply. Skin reddens and tightens. Eyes ache from constant brightness. Muscles stiffen from limited movement and awkward sleeping positions. Small injuries that seemed insignificant during the first days become persistent irritations. Cuts remain exposed to salt. Bruises darken. Blisters form where wet fabric rubs against skin. Nothing about these ailments appears severe when considered individually. Together, however, they alter daily existence. The raft community that emerged during the previous days must now devote increasing attention to physical maintenance. People inspect one another's injuries. Makeshift treatments are attempted. Limited medical supplies are used cautiously. Decisions once focused upon organization now focus upon preservation. You watch the balance of priorities begin to shift. Earlier, survivors concentrated on establishing order. Now they concentrate on preventing decline. The difference may seem subtle, yet it changes the atmosphere of the documentary. The challenge is no longer creating routine. The challenge is sustaining it under deteriorating conditions. The sun occupies a central role in this transformation. Morning warmth initially feels welcome after cool nights upon open water. Yet as the day progresses, comfort becomes pressure. The sunlight reflected from the sea reaches survivors from multiple directions at once. Shade, when available, becomes treasured. Pieces of canvas are adjusted carefully. Positions within the raft acquire value according to exposure. Time itself begins changing character. During the first days, hours often passed through activity. Supplies required organization. Plans required discussion. Procedures required creation. By the third day, many of those systems already exist. The passage of time therefore becomes more noticeable. Survivors become increasingly aware of how slowly a day can move when confined to a small space beneath an open sky. Waiting expands. The horizon remains under constant observation, yet the act of searching now carries a degree of familiarity. Every distant shape no longer produces the same immediate surge of anticipation. Hope remains present, but it becomes more cautious. Experience teaches restraint. This adjustment is not surrender. Rather, it represents adaptation. Human beings cannot sustain constant expectation indefinitely. The mind naturally seeks equilibrium. Survivors learn to balance optimism with practicality. They continue watching. They continue preparing signals. Yet they also continue repairing equipment, conserving energy, and managing resources. The sea offers occasional interruptions to routine. Schools of fish pass beneath the raft. Birds appear overhead before vanishing toward distant destinations. Floating debris emerges unexpectedly from the swells. Such encounters attract attention because novelty has become rare. Anything different briefly alters the rhythm of the day. Memory continues evolving as well. Earlier recollections often centered upon the sinking itself. Survivors exchanged observations and reconstructed events. By the third day, many minds begin traveling further backward. Attention shifts toward lives that existed before the voyage began. Family members occupy thoughts with increasing frequency. Familiar places become vivid. Ordinary moments return with surprising clarity. A meal shared years earlier. A train journey. A conversation that seemed insignificant at the time. Memory rarely obeys logic. It selects details according to its own mysterious priorities. You observe how these recollections influence the raft community. Stories circulate more frequently now. Not because survivors are attempting to escape reality, but because remembering helps maintain continuity. Each story serves as evidence that another world still exists beyond the horizon. A world containing homes, streets, workplaces, and loved ones. Such reminders become increasingly valuable. The sea has a way of narrowing existence. Days revolve around water, weather, supplies, and endurance. Without memory, the world can begin shrinking to the dimensions of the raft itself. Recollection pushes back against that contraction. Meanwhile, physical conditions continue changing. The body consumes energy even while resting. Dehydration advances gradually. Sleep remains imperfect. Muscles receive little opportunity for proper recovery. The cumulative effects are difficult to notice from 1 hour to the next, yet obvious when measured across several days. The survivors are still functioning. The routines established earlier continue operating. Responsibilities continue being fulfilled. Conversations continue taking place. But beneath that appearance of stability, a quieter process has begun. The sea is taking its toll. Not through sudden catastrophe. Through persistence. The same persistence with which waves cross oceans, winds shape weather, and sunlight falls upon open water day after day without interruption. And as afternoon approaches once more, the raft drifts onward beneath a bright sky, carrying a community that is beginning to understand the true nature of prolonged exposure. Not as an event, but as a condition. The afternoon heat settles across the raft with a weight that is difficult to escape. Unlike cold, which often announces itself through sharp discomfort, heat can arrive gradually enough to feel almost harmless at first. The sun climbs higher. The air grows still. Reflections multiply across the water. Hours pass. Only later does the full burden become apparent. Energy fades more quickly. Concentration becomes harder to maintain. Small tasks require greater effort than they did before. The survivors begin measuring movement carefully. Unnecessary activity is avoided whenever possible. Positions are adjusted slowly. Conversations become less frequent during the hottest portions of the day. The instinct to conserve strength emerges naturally. Experience teaches that every action carries a cost, and the body possesses only limited reserves from which to draw. Water remains at the center of every calculation. Its importance is no longer theoretical. Thirst has become a constant companion. Not an overwhelming thirst, at least not yet, but a steady awareness that accompanies every hour. The sight of water stretching endlessly in every direction introduces a peculiar contradiction. The ocean surrounds the survivors completely, yet offers nothing they can safely drink. Throughout maritime history, this contradiction has occupied a powerful place in the accounts of those who drifted at sea. Fresh water acquires an almost symbolic significance. Survivors think about it frequently. They discuss it. They monitor supplies repeatedly, even when they already know the numbers involved. The mind returns to the subject because it represents both immediate necessity and future uncertainty. Clouds therefore attract attention beyond their visual beauty. A distant bank of grey on the horizon may suggest rain. A change in wind may hint at weather approaching from another direction. Even the possibility of precipitation alters the mood within the raft. Rain offers more than relief. It offers opportunity. Containers can be filled. Cloth can be used to gather water. A brief shower may influence survival calculations for days afterward. The sky becomes something to study rather than simply observe. You watch survivors develop an increasingly intimate relationship with weather. Subtle changes gain importance. Wind direction matters. Cloud height matters. Temperature matters. These details, easily ignored under ordinary circumstances, now shape expectations and decisions. The body, meanwhile, continues recording the passage of time in its own way. Skin becomes increasingly sensitive. Salt crystals form along clothing and exposed surfaces. Hands remain swollen from repeated immersion. Sleep deprivation accumulates slowly, carried from one night into the next. No single symptom defines the experience. Rather, countless minor discomforts merge into a continuous background condition. This accumulation creates an unusual challenge. Human beings often endure remarkable hardship when they can identify a clear endpoint. A difficult march concludes. A battle ends. A storm passes. Drifting at sea rarely provides such certainty. The survivors do not know whether rescue will arrive tomorrow or next week. They cannot compare present suffering against a known timetable. As a result, endurance becomes psychological as well as physical. People begin developing personal strategies for managing uncertainty. Some focus upon routine. Some focus upon observation. Others concentrate upon helping companions. A few retreat into memory. These approaches differ, yet they serve a similar purpose. They provide direction within circumstances where larger outcomes remain beyond individual control. The raft community continues adapting in subtle ways. Conversations change. During the earlier days, discussions often centered upon the sinking and the immediate future. Now topics drift more freely. Stories from home appear more often. Memories are exchanged. Jokes emerge unexpectedly. Laughter, when it occurs, tends to be brief but genuine. Such moments possess surprising value. They remind the survivors that they remain more than passengers in distress. They remain individuals with histories, relationships, preferences, and identities extending beyond the raft. The preservation of morale is rarely dramatic, yet it contributes to survival as surely as any carefully managed supply. You can see how companionship alters the experience of drifting. Those alone upon the sea face challenges different from those experienced by groups. Solitude introduced its own pressures. Within communities, however small, burdens could be shared. Responsibility could be distributed. Observation could be collective rather than individual. The presence of others provided evidence that reality remained stable. Even so, tension occasionally appears. Confined spaces magnify differences. Fatigue reduces patience. Anxiety influences judgment. Minor disagreements arise regarding resources, priorities, or interpretations of distant observations. Such moments are natural. What matters is not their existence, but how they are managed. Most surviving groups learn quickly that cooperation remains essential. The ocean leaves little room for prolonged conflict. Resources are shared. Risks are shared. Outcomes are shared. Practical necessity encourages compromise where personality alone might not. As evening approaches, the quality of light begins changing once more. The harsh brilliance of afternoon softens into warmer colors. Shadows lengthen across the raft. The sea reflects gold and copper where earlier it reflected white and blue. For a short period each day, the environment regains a sense of gentleness despite the hardships unfolding within it. Many survivors remember these hours vividly, not because conditions improve dramatically, but because the intensity of daylight eases. Eyes rest more comfortably. Temperatures begin to fall. The approach of night introduces fresh uncertainties, yet it also offers temporary relief from exposure. The routines established during previous days continue. Supplies are checked. Equipment is secured. Weather is discussed. The horizon receives one final examination before darkness returns. Everything appears familiar, and that familiarity reveals how much the condition has changed. The raft is no longer an emergency refuge. It has become an environment. Its inhabitants understand its routines, its limitations, and its demands. They have learned how to live within it, at least for now. Yet as the sun sinks beyond the horizon, another reality becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. Adaptation has not stopped decline. The systems created during the first days remain intact, but maintaining them requires greater effort than before. The sea continues extracting its price, 1 hour at a time. Night approaches. The stars will return. The waves will continue their endless motion. And somewhere beyond the darkness, the next stage of the ordeal is already beginning to take shape. Weather on the horizon. The first sign is not the cloud itself. It is the wind. For several days the survivors have become familiar with the ordinary movement of air across open water. They have learned its rhythms almost unconsciously. A certain breeze accompanies morning. Another arrives during the afternoon. Small variations occur, yet the overall pattern remains recognizable. Then, sometime during the following day, that pattern begins to change. The alteration is subtle enough that some people notice it before others. The air feels heavier. The movement of the raft shifts slightly. Small ripples appear upon the water at unusual angles. None of these signs would seem remarkable to an observer aboard a large vessel. To those living upon rafts and lifeboats, however, they attract immediate attention. The sea teaches vigilance. After days spent studying weather, survivors develop an awareness that would have surprised them under ordinary circumstances. They learn to observe cloud shapes, wind direction, and wave behavior with unusual care. Their survival depends upon details that many people spend entire lifetimes ignoring. By midday, the clouds become visible. At first they appear as distant formations resting low upon the horizon. The ocean often produces such sights. Great towers of vapor rise far away, seeming almost motionless from a distance. Yet these clouds possess a certain density that encourages concern. Their outlines sharpen. Their color deepens. Hour by hour they appear larger. Conversation turns increasingly toward the weather. Predictions emerge. Some believe rain may arrive. Others anticipate stronger winds. A few remain cautiously optimistic. Rain could replenish water supplies. Cooler temperatures could offer relief from relentless sunlight. The same weather that threatens comfort may also provide opportunity. This dual nature of approaching storms appears throughout countless maritime accounts. Weather rarely functions as either friend or enemy. More often it occupies both roles simultaneously. Rain may provide fresh water while bringing dangerous seas. Strong winds may cool exhausted bodies while threatening fragile equipment. Survival at sea frequently requires accepting such contradictions. You watch the raft community respond in practical ways. Loose items are secured. Containers are inspected. Makeshift shelters are reinforced as effectively as limited resources allow. These preparations serve obvious purposes, yet they also create something equally important. They transform anticipation into action. Action reduces helplessness. No one aboard the raft can control the weather. They cannot redirect clouds or calm the sea. They can, however, prepare. Even modest preparations create a sense of participation in events that might otherwise feel overwhelming. As the afternoon advances, the ocean begins changing character. The water that appeared almost gentle during previous days develops sharper textures. Waves no longer roll beneath the raft with the same predictable rhythm. Their angles shift. Their intervals become less regular. The movement remains manageable, yet the change is unmistakable. The survivors notice. People adjust positions instinctively. Conversations pause more frequently as attention turns toward the surrounding water. Eyes move repeatedly between the horizon and the approaching clouds. The environment itself seems to be gathering energy. The psychological effect of weather should not be underestimated. For several days, the survivors have been confronting predictable challenges: heat, thirst, exposure, fatigue. Difficult conditions, certainly, but conditions that could be understood and managed. Approaching weather introduces uncertainty of a different kind. The future once again becomes difficult to predict. Memory plays a role here as well. Many aboard the rafts possess previous experience with storms. Sailors remember rough passages. Merchant seamen recall difficult crossings. Naval personnel remember watches spent beneath hostile skies. These memories shape expectations, though not always accurately. A storm encountered aboard a ship bears little resemblance to one encountered aboard a raft. The difference lies in scale. A vessel absorbs much of the ocean's force. Steel hulls rise and fall through heavy seas. Decks provide space. Compartments offer shelter. Rafts possess none of these advantages. Their inhabitants exist much closer to the water itself. Every change in the sea becomes immediate. By late afternoon, the sky dominates attention. Cloud formations now occupy a significant portion of the horizon. Their shadows darken the distant water. Sunlight filters through uneven layers of vapor, creating shifting patterns across the waves. The beauty of the scene remains undeniable. So does the warning contained within it. You can feel anticipation spreading through the raft. Not panic. Not yet. Something quieter. A heightened awareness. The same awareness that settles over people when they know circumstances are about to change but cannot yet determine exactly how. The routines established during previous days continue operating. Supplies are checked. Water is rationed. Watches are discussed. Yet these familiar activities now occur beneath the growing presence of approaching weather. The environment itself is beginning to exert new pressure upon the survivors. And that pressure changes perception. The horizon is no longer merely a place where rescue might appear. It has become the source of something else. A force moving steadily toward them across open water. A force that cannot be avoided. As evening approaches, the clouds continue advancing. The sea darkens beneath them. The wind freshens. And the drifting communities scattered across the ocean prepare as best they can for a night that may be very different from the ones that came before. The storm does not arrive all at once. Its approach unfolds through a series of gradual changes that become impossible to ignore only when viewed together. The wind strengthens. The sea develops sharper edges. The sky loses some of its brightness. By sunset, the survivors understand that the weather which had occupied the horizon throughout the day is now part of their immediate world. The first drops of rain are greeted with mixed emotions. Some strike faces turned upward in anticipation. Others land upon canvas, clothing, and exposed skin. For a few moments, the rain feels almost welcome. Fresh water falling from the sky possesses an importance difficult to exaggerate. Containers are positioned hurriedly. Pieces of cloth are stretched where possible. Hands reach upward instinctively. The ocean that surrounds them cannot sustain life. The water falling from the clouds can. Throughout maritime history, survivors drifting at sea have often remembered rain with extraordinary clarity. It represented relief, opportunity, and renewal. Even brief showers could alter calculations that had previously seemed grim. A successful collection of rainwater might extend endurance by days. Yet the same weather bringing relief also carries danger. The rain intensifies. Wind follows. The surface of the sea begins changing more rapidly than before. Waves rise higher. The raft responds with sharper movements. Water splashes across its edges. Items that remain secure during calmer conditions suddenly require renewed attention. You watch the community shift from collection to preservation. Containers are protected. Equipment is checked repeatedly. Individuals brace themselves against unexpected motion. The atmosphere aboard the raft changes from cautious optimism to concentrated effort. Survival remains possible, but it demands greater participation than during the preceding days. Darkness arrives beneath thickening clouds. Unlike previous nights, the stars remain hidden. The familiar points of light that provided orientation and companionship vanish behind moving layers of weather. The horizon becomes difficult to distinguish from the sea itself. The world contracts. For the survivors, this loss of visibility carries emotional consequences. Human beings often derive comfort from distant reference points. A visible horizon provides orientation. Stars provide continuity. Even when such features offer no practical rescue, they remind observers that the world extends beyond immediate circumstances. Storm clouds remove those reminders. The raft now exists within a smaller universe. Wind, rain, water, darkness. The conditions demand attention. Hours pass beneath shifting weather. At times the rain eases. At other moments it returns with renewed intensity. Waves strike from changing directions. Sleep becomes difficult. Rest occurs in fragments rather than complete intervals. People drift in and out of exhaustion while remaining alert enough to respond when necessary. This combination of fatigue and vigilance produces a distinctive form of weariness. The body never fully recovers. The mind never fully relaxes. Energy continues, leaving faster than it can be restored. Such conditions rarely create immediate collapse, yet they accelerate the gradual erosion already underway. The sea itself seems transformed. Only days earlier it appeared almost serene. The same water now reveals another aspect of its nature. Swells rise unexpectedly from darkness. Wind scatters spray across faces and clothing. Movements that once felt familiar become unpredictable. The survivors are reminded once again that the ocean is not a fixed environment. It changes continually, and adaptation must change with it. You can observe this principle throughout the ordeal. Every time the survivors establish a degree of stability, circumstances evolve. New pressures emerge. New decisions become necessary. Survival does not reward those who merely endure. It favors those capable of adjusting to changing conditions without losing cohesion. The raft community demonstrates this repeatedly during the storm. People assist one another without requiring extensive discussion. Responsibilities shift according to immediate needs. Those who are stronger at a given moment help those who are weaker. Experience accumulated over previous days now proves valuable. The routines established earlier provide a framework through which uncertainty can be managed. Toward the early hours of morning, the weather begins easing. Not dramatically. The wind remains present. The sea remains unsettled. Yet the intensity diminishes enough to notice. Rain falls less frequently. Gaps appear within the cloud cover. Darkness slowly begins giving way to a pale horizon. The survivors emerge from the night changed. Not because the storm was catastrophic. Because it was exhausting. A difficult reality becomes increasingly apparent. Every challenge consumes resources. Water can sometimes be replenished. Equipment can occasionally be repaired. Human energy is harder to restore. Each demanding night leaves traces that remain visible the following day. When dawn finally arrives, the ocean appears unfamiliar once again. The surface carries the memory of recent weather. Clouds drift away in uneven formations. Debris has shifted. Distances between drifting groups have altered. The sea has rearranged portions of the survivors' world during the hours of darkness. Yet another change is also becoming visible. The people themselves have changed. Faces appear more tired. Movements become slower. Conversations require greater effort. The physical and psychological costs of prolonged exposure are no longer distant possibilities. They are present realities. The storm has not destroyed the raft community, but it has accelerated a process already underway. The gradual transition from adaptation to attrition. And as the survivors greet another uncertain morning upon the open sea, the true challenge of endurance begins revealing its full weight. The slow erosion. The morning after the storm feels quieter than it should. The wind has diminished. The rain has passed. The sea, though still unsettled, no longer demands constant attention. By any ordinary measure, conditions have improved. Yet the survivors greet this calmer day with less energy than before. The reason is simple. The storm has ended. Its effects have not. Fatigue now occupies a more visible place within daily life. During the first days after the sinking, exhaustion often arrived in waves, interrupted by urgency and necessity. There was always another task requiring attention, another decision demanding focus. Now a deeper weariness begins settling across the raft. It does not announce itself dramatically. Rather, it becomes present in countless small ways. People take longer to stand. Conversations begin more slowly. Movements become deliberate. Periods of silence grow longer. The body is accounting for everything it has endured. Sleep has been fragmented for days. Exposure has remained constant. Food and water have been limited. Muscles have worked without proper recovery. The effects accumulate quietly until they become part of the environment itself. You watch survivors adapt to this new condition just as they adapted to the sea. The routines remain intact. Supplies are still checked. Watches are still maintained. Responsibilities are still carried out. Yet each task now requires greater effort. Activities once completed almost automatically demand concentration. The community continues functioning, but it does so with reduced reserves. This marks an important transition in the experience of drifting. Earlier chapters focused upon creating stability. The survivors transformed disorder into routine. Now the challenge becomes preserving that routine while physical capacity gradually declines. The systems remain. The people operating them are changing. The sun returns after the storm. Its warmth dries clothing and equipment. Water collected during the rain provides temporary relief from immediate concerns. These developments would have seemed enormously encouraging a few days earlier. They remain valuable now, yet optimism has become more measured. Experience has altered expectations. The survivors understand that improvements are often temporary. Calm weather may be followed by rough seas. Rain may be followed by days of dryness. A distant aircraft may vanish before anyone notices the signals directed toward it. Hope remains present, but it has matured into something quieter. The horizon receives less frantic attention than before. People still watch it. They always will. Yet the manner of observation has changed. During the early days, every unusual shape inspired immediate anticipation. Now experience encourages caution. Survivors continue searching, but they do so with a steadier mindset. The horizon remains important without dominating every thought. This adjustment conserves energy. Constant expectation carries its own cost. Emotional highs followed by repeated disappointment can be exhausting. Many survivors gradually learn to hold hope and uncertainty together. They prepare for rescue without depending upon it arriving immediately. The sea encourages such balance. Its rhythms rarely conform to human desires. Days unfold according to weather, current, and circumstance rather than expectation. Those who adapt most successfully often learn to focus upon what can be controlled while accepting what cannot. Meanwhile, the physical environment continues leaving its mark. Salt sores become increasingly common. Skin exposed to constant moisture and friction begins breaking down in vulnerable areas. Hands remain swollen. Minor infections become concerns. Even sitting comfortably becomes difficult after prolonged confinement within small craft. Such discomforts rarely dominate historical accounts. Battles receive greater attention. Sinkings receive greater attention. Rescues receive greater attention. Yet for those who drifted, these persistent physical realities often defined daily existence far more than dramatic events. The body possesses remarkable resilience, but resilience is not the same as invulnerability. Every day spent upon open water extracts a payment. The cost may be small when measured hour by hour. Across a week, however, the cumulative effect becomes impossible to ignore. You can observe this reality in the way people move. A sailor who once climbed ladders with ease now changes position carefully. Someone who spent years working long shifts aboard ships now rests more frequently. Physical confidence begins giving way to conservation. Energy becomes something to manage rather than spend. The raft community responds accordingly. Tasks are distributed with greater attention to individual condition. Those who remain strongest assume additional responsibilities when possible. Others contribute where they can. Cooperation becomes increasingly important because no one possesses unlimited reserves. The psychological atmosphere evolves alongside the physical one. Earlier, conversation often focused upon plans and possibilities. Now discussions drift toward observations. Weather, supplies, memories. Small details. The future remains uncertain, but speculation about it becomes less frequent. There is a growing tendency to remain within the present day because the present already requires considerable attention. Memory, however, continues expanding. Stories grow longer. Details become richer. People return repeatedly to familiar recollections, sometimes adding elements they omitted before. Family members remain frequent subjects. So do ordinary routines from civilian life. A favorite meal. A workplace. A holiday gathering. The memories themselves are not unusual. Their significance lies in the environment where they are shared. The raft has become a place where distant lives are kept alive through repetition. Each story serves as a reminder that the survivors belong to larger worlds beyond the sea. Worlds that continue existing even if they cannot currently be reached. As afternoon light spreads across the water, the ocean appears almost gentle once more. Small waves roll beneath the raft. Seabirds circle briefly overhead. Clouds drift slowly toward distant horizons. The scene might appear peaceful to an outside observer. Yet beneath that peaceful surface, a slower struggle is unfolding. The struggle to maintain strength, to preserve routine, to continue functioning despite gradual decline. The storm accelerated the process. Now the survivors must learn how to live within it. Because the greatest threat is no longer immediate disaster. It is erosion. The patient, persistent erosion of body, energy, and certainty. And unlike a storm, erosion never truly leaves. It simply continues. Not completely. Certain moments remain distinct. A passing bird. A brief rain shower. A distant shape upon the horizon. Yet the overall rhythm of existence grows increasingly uniform. Morning follows night. The sun crosses the sky. Darkness returns. Between these familiar markers stretches a landscape of waiting. Time behaves differently upon the open sea. Aboard ships, calendars, watches, and routines provide structure. Even difficult voyages possess destinations. Drifting removes many of those reference points. The survivors still attempt to measure days, but the experience of time becomes increasingly subjective. A single afternoon can feel remarkably long. An entire day may pass in a blur of fatigue. You can observe this transformation in the way people discuss the past. Questions arise. How many days have passed since the sinking? Was the storm yesterday or the day before? When was the last aircraft sighted? Such uncertainties do not necessarily indicate confusion. Rather, they reflect the unusual environment in which memory now operates. The ordinary landmarks that help organize experience have largely disappeared. The body contributes to this effect. Fatigue influences perception. Limited sleep alters concentration. Dehydration, even when not severe, affects clarity of thought. None of these factors need reach dramatic levels to shape daily experience. Small deficits accumulate gradually until they influence how reality itself is interpreted. The survivors continue noticing this change. Names occasionally take longer to recall. Conversations pause while someone searches for a detail. Thoughts wander unexpectedly. Most of these moments pass without concern. Yet together they reveal how prolonged exposure affects not only the body, but the mind as well. The sea remains relentless in its simplicity. Every day presents the same fundamental horizon. Water extends outward in every direction. The sky shifts through familiar cycles of color and light. Waves rise and fall with patient consistency. Nature offers variation, but not enough to satisfy the human desire for progress. Progress becomes difficult to measure. The raft is moving. Currents carry it somewhere. Wind influences its course. Yet the movement rarely feels meaningful because there is no visible destination. Human beings often draw encouragement from visible advancement. A road passes beneath a vehicle. A mountain peak grows nearer. A harbor emerges from the distance. At sea, movement can occur without evidence. This creates a peculiar psychological burden. The survivors must trust that unseen processes continue operating. Search efforts may be underway somewhere beyond the horizon. Currents may be carrying them toward shipping lanes. Circumstances may be improving or worsening without providing immediate signs. Patience becomes less a virtue than a necessity. Within the raft community, subtle shifts continue taking place. People who once spoke frequently may grow quieter. Others become more conversational. Roles adjust according to changing strengths and limitations. Leadership itself evolves. The authority required during a sinking differs from the authority required during prolonged drifting. Immediate decisiveness becomes less important than steadiness. You watch certain individuals emerge as anchors within the group. Not because they possess special skills. Not because they offer unrealistic optimism. Because they remain consistent. They continue performing routine tasks. They maintain calm during uncertainty. They help preserve the rhythm of daily life. Such qualities often become increasingly valuable as conditions deteriorate. The importance of morale grows more visible with each passing day. Morale is often misunderstood as enthusiasm. In survival situations, it is something quieter. It is the willingness to continue participating in routine despite uncertainty. It is the decision to maintain equipment even when rescue seems distant. It is the choice to share information, offer assistance, and preserve order. These actions create continuity. Continuity creates stability. Stability supports endurance. The chain is simple, yet essential. Meanwhile, the physical effects of exposure continue accumulating. Clothing weakens. Equipment shows signs of wear. The survivors themselves carry visible evidence of the ordeal. Faces appear thinner. Skin darkens beneath the sun. Movements remain careful. Even small tasks require planning. The community has entered a phase where conservation governs nearly everything. Resources are conserved. Energy is conserved. Attention is conserved. Emotion is conserved. Nothing is wasted unnecessarily. You can sense how this mindset influences perception. Survivors become increasingly attentive to details that might once have escaped notice. A slight change in wind. A distant cloud formation. The behavior of seabirds. Such observations matter because they represent information. Information, however limited, provides a measure of connection to the surrounding world. Occasionally, the ocean offers reminders that other life exists beyond the raft. A school of fish moves beneath the surface. A bird rests briefly before continuing its journey. At night, bioluminescence glows in the wake of passing waves. These moments possess unusual significance. They interrupt monotony without demanding effort. They remind the survivors that the sea is not empty, even when it feels endless. As another evening approaches, the light softens once more. The survivors perform familiar tasks. Supplies are checked. Equipment is secured. Observations are exchanged. The routine continues because it must continue. Yet beneath that continuity, A deeper reality has become increasingly difficult to ignore. The ordeal is no longer defined by dramatic events. It is defined by endurance. The survivors have adapted to the sea. They have adapted to routine. They have adapted to uncertainty. Now they face something more difficult. The challenge of continuing those adaptations indefinitely. No one aboard the raft knows where the limit lies. No one knows how much longer rescue may take. No one knows what tomorrow's horizon will reveal. The answers remain hidden somewhere beyond sight. And as darkness settles once again across the open water, the survivors drift onward into a stage of the ordeal where physical hardship and psychological endurance begin to merge into a single condition. A condition that will shape every thought, every decision, and every memory that follows. The interior horizon. By the time the next phase of drifting arrives, the horizon has acquired a second meaning. The physical horizon remains where it has always been. A distant circle separating sea from sky. The survivors continue watching it. They continue searching for ships, aircraft, smoke, sails, or any sign that rescue may be approaching. Yet another horizon now occupies increasing attention. It exists within the mind. The change occurs gradually enough that many survivors do not immediately recognize it. During the first days, survival demanded constant focus upon external conditions. Water, weather, equipment, injury. These concerns remain important, but routine has made them familiar. The mind, no longer consumed entirely by immediate tasks, begins turning inward. Long stretches of silence contribute to this transformation. The raft still contains conversation, but not continuously. There are only so many practical matters to discuss. Eventually words give way to observation. Observation gives way to thought. Thought drifts toward memory, imagination, and reflection. The sea encourages this movement. Its vastness leaves room for contemplation. The same horizon that conceals rescue also conceals countless possibilities. Human beings naturally attempt to fill such spaces. They remember. They speculate. They revisit old decisions. They imagine future reunions. The mind becomes a traveler when the body cannot. You watch survivors spend increasing time in recollection. The memories themselves vary enormously. A father remembers teaching a child to ride a bicycle. A sailor recalls a harbor visited years earlier. A merchant seaman thinks about a meal shared before departure. A young serviceman replays conversations he scarcely noticed at the time. These recollections often appear unexpectedly. A particular cloud formation resembles a familiar landscape. A smell carried by the wind triggers association. A phrase spoken by another survivor unlocks a distant memory. The process rarely follows logic. Memory has its own currents. Some survivors discover that ordinary moments return with greater force than dramatic ones. The mind reaches toward stability. It seeks places untouched by the uncertainty of the present. Familiar routines, once overlooked, acquire new value when viewed from a drifting raft. A kitchen table. A train platform. A garden after rain. The sound of footsteps within a hallway. Such details become precious precisely because they are inaccessible. The raft community notices these changes in one another. Stories grow longer. Descriptions become more detailed. Individuals revisit the same memories repeatedly, not because they have forgotten telling them, but because the act of remembering itself provides comfort. Familiar stories become part of the routine, much like checking supplies or watching the weather. These exchanges serve another purpose as well. They preserve identity. The sea has a tendency to simplify existence. Days revolve around water, food, weather, and endurance. Under such conditions, people risk becoming defined solely by survival. Memory pushes against that reduction. It reminds individuals who they were before the sinking and who they hope to remain afterward. You can observe how carefully survivors protect this connection. Someone describes a profession practiced ashore. Someone speaks about family traditions. Someone remembers a favorite street in a distant city. These details may seem insignificant, yet they function as anchors. They prevent the present condition from consuming the entirety of personal identity. At the same time, imagination begins occupying a larger role. Not all thoughts move backward. Many move forward. Survivors imagine rescue repeatedly. They picture approaching ships. They imagine stepping onto solid ground. They reconstruct future conversations with remarkable specificity. The mind often rehearses outcomes it desperately hopes to experience. Such visions are natural. They provide motivation. They offer emotional direction. Yet they also carry risks. Expectations can become burdens if reality fails to match them. For this reason, many survivors learn to balance imagination with restraint. The balance is delicate. Too little hope invites despair. Too much certainty invites disappointment. The most resilient individuals often occupy a middle ground. They prepare for rescue while accepting uncertainty. They allow themselves to imagine the future without requiring it to arrive immediately. Meanwhile, the physical world continues exerting pressure. The sea does not pause because minds have turned inward. Waves continue moving beneath the raft. Weather continues changing. Supplies continue diminishing. The practical realities of survival remain present even while attention shifts toward memory and reflection. This coexistence defines the experience. The survivors live simultaneously within two worlds. One consists of rope, canvas, water containers, weather, and routine. The other consists of memory, imagination, hope, and identity. Neither world can be ignored. Both influence survival. As afternoon light spreads across the ocean, the raft drifts through waters that appear almost unchanged from previous days. Yet the internal landscape has evolved considerably. The survivors are no longer simply enduring external conditions. They are navigating internal ones as well. Questions emerge that possess no practical answers. What will home feel like after this? How much has already changed? Who might be waiting? Who might never know what happened here? Such thoughts arrive quietly. The sea offers ample opportunity for them to grow. And as the hours pass beneath a broad sky, the horizon ahead remains empty while the horizons within the survivors become increasingly crowded with memory, hope, and uncertainty. As the days continue, the boundary between observation and imagination becomes increasingly delicate. The survivors remain attentive to the realities around them. They continue monitoring supplies, watching weather, and maintaining routine. Yet prolonged isolation has a way of altering perception. The mind, deprived of novelty and certainty, begins searching for patterns wherever it can find them. The horizon plays a central role in this process. For days it has represented possibility. Every survivor has studied it repeatedly, sometimes for hours at a time. Human vision is not designed for such constant searching across immense distances. Small irregularities attract attention. Light reflects from waves in unusual ways. Clouds gather in distant formations. Shadows appear and disappear. Occasionally, someone believes they see a ship. The announcement spreads quickly. Heads turn. Eyes narrow. People shift position carefully to gain a better view. For a few moments, anticipation fills the raft. The possibility seems real enough to touch. Then the shape dissolves into haze, cloud, or reflected light. The horizon resumes its familiar emptiness. Such moments become increasingly common. Not because survivors are careless observers, but because hope itself influences perception. The mind naturally favors interpretations that promise relief. A distant possibility often appears more convincing than it truly is. This tendency is deeply human. It appears in survival accounts across centuries and oceans. You watch how different individuals respond to these disappointments. Some laugh softly at their own mistakes. Others grow quiet. A few continue watching the same portion of horizon long after everyone else has returned to routine. None of these reactions are unusual. Each represents an effort to reconcile hope with uncertainty. The nights introduce their own challenges. Darkness transforms the sea into something abstract. Distances disappear. Orientation becomes difficult. Sounds carry strangely across open water. A splash in the darkness may be close or far away. A gust of wind may resemble a voice for a fleeting moment. The mind fills gaps when information becomes scarce. Sleep, already imperfect, grows increasingly fragmented. People drift into brief periods of rest before waking again. Dreams blend with reality. Memories intermingle with present surroundings. Upon waking, it may take several moments to remember exactly where one is. Such experiences are not signs of failure. They are ordinary responses to extraordinary conditions. The body and mind are adapting as best they can. Yet adaptation carries costs. Fatigue accumulates. Concentration weakens. Perception occasionally becomes unreliable. The survivors remain capable and aware, but they are operating under pressures few people encounter during ordinary life. Memory now occupies even more territory within daily existence. Stories repeated earlier in the ordeal acquire additional details. Familiar recollections return again and again. Some survivors begin constructing entire journeys through memory, revisiting homes room by room or recalling favorite streets step by step. These mental travels provide structure when the physical world offers little change. You can see why such practices become valuable. The raft measures only a few feet across. Memory measures entire lifetimes. Within recollection, survivors regain access to scale. They revisit places larger than the ocean immediately surrounding them. They reconnect with identities shaped over decades rather than days. The process is both comforting and necessary. At the same time, grief begins appearing in quieter forms. Not necessarily grief for those lost during the sinking, though that remains present. Rather, grief for certainty itself. Before the disaster, tomorrow possessed assumptions. Meals would occur. Duties would continue. The voyage would progress. Even danger existed within structures that felt comprehensible. Drifting has removed many of those assumptions. The future remains unwritten. This realization can feel surprisingly heavy. Human beings rarely notice how much comfort they derive from ordinary expectations until those expectations disappear. The survivors are learning what life feels like when very little can be predicted beyond the next sunrise. And yet something remarkable accompanies this uncertainty. Many individuals discover reserves of patience they did not know they possessed. The ability to continue despite incomplete information. The ability to endure without immediate reward. The ability to accept uncertainty without surrendering hope. These qualities emerge slowly, often unnoticed by those displaying them. They reveal themselves through persistence rather than dramatic action. A man checks supplies for the 10th consecutive day. Another continues watching the horizon despite repeated disappointment. Someone shares encouragement even while privately struggling. The actions appear small. Together they form the foundation of endurance. As evening approaches once more, the ocean glows beneath lowering sunlight. The water reflects gold across long distances. Seabirds pass overhead on routes known only to themselves. The scene possesses a calm beauty that contrasts sharply with the hardship unfolding within it. The survivors notice this beauty. Many accounts describe such moments. Not because beauty removes suffering, because it coexists with it. The sea remains capable of producing remarkable sunsets even while testing those who drift upon it. The sky remains capable of extraordinary colors even when uncertainty dominates daily life. Nature offers no explanation for this contradiction. It simply presents it. The raft continues moving through the fading light. The community remains intact. The routines remain intact. Yet everyone aboard understands that something important has changed. The greatest challenge is no longer learning how to survive. They have already learned that. The challenge is learning how to continue surviving when survival itself becomes ordinary. When uncertainty becomes familiar. When waiting becomes routine. When the horizon offers possibility without guarantees. And as darkness settles once more across the sea, the survivors drift onward into a stage of the ordeal where endurance is measured less by physical strength than by the quiet ability to preserve hope without demanding certainty. Signs beyond the horizon. The first indication arrives so quietly that it could easily be missed. A bird. Not the occasional seabirds that have appeared throughout previous days, gliding effortlessly above the waves before disappearing into the distance. This bird behaves differently. It circles. It returns. It lingers longer than expected before moving away toward a particular section of horizon. One survivor notices. Then another. Soon several people are watching. The observation itself changes nothing. Birds do not guarantee land. They do not guarantee ships. Yet after so many days spent studying an environment where every detail matters, even small irregularities acquire significance. The sea teaches patience, but it also teaches attention. The survivors have become skilled observers almost without realizing it. During ordinary life, many of these individuals would never have devoted such concentration to clouds, currents, birds, or subtle changes in light. Now those same details command careful study because they may contain information unavailable from any other source. Information has become a valuable resource. Not as valuable as water. Not as valuable as shelter. Yet valuable nonetheless. The unknown exerts pressure of its own. Any clue, however small, offers relief from complete uncertainty. Throughout the day, other signs begin appearing. A piece of floating vegetation drifts past the raft. Later, another follows. Neither item proves remarkable on its own. Ocean currents carry objects across extraordinary distances. Yet their appearance encourages discussion. Survivors exchange observations. Possibilities are considered. No firm conclusions emerge. Still, the atmosphere changes. The signs may mean nothing. They may mean something. And that distinction matters. For many days the horizon has represented absence. No ships. No aircraft. No visible destination. The appearance of unusual details interrupts that pattern. The survivors find themselves looking outward with renewed curiosity. You watch hope adjust once more. Not surge. Not explode into certainty. Simply shift. Hope has become more careful during the ordeal. It no longer rushes toward every possibility. Experience has taught restraint. Yet experience has not extinguished the desire to search for meaning. Human beings remain remarkably willing to look beyond present circumstances, even when disappointment has become familiar. The raft community discusses possibilities while continuing routine. Supplies are checked. Weather is observed. Equipment is maintained. The structure developed during earlier days remains intact. This is important. The survivors have learned not to abandon practical responsibilities simply because a promising sign appears. Routine continues, providing stability. The sea, meanwhile, remains largely unchanged. The same waves rise and fall beneath the raft. The same wind moves across open water. The same immense sky stretches overhead. Yet perception alters the experience of familiar environments. When possibility enters a situation, even cautiously, the world begins to feel slightly different. Distances seem less empty. The horizon appears less final. The mind becomes more attentive to what may lie beyond sight. As afternoon approaches, another observation draws attention. A faint line of clouds rests low upon the horizon. Such formations are common enough, yet something about this one seems distinct. It remains visible longer than expected. Its shape changes more slowly. Several survivors find themselves returning to it repeatedly. No one can say exactly what they are seeing. The ocean often resists certainty. Clouds resemble land. Land resembles clouds. Atmospheric conditions distort distance and scale. Entire islands have been mistaken for weather. Entire weather systems have been mistaken for islands. The survivors understand these realities. Many possess maritime experience. They know how easily the horizon deceives. Nevertheless, the possibility remains difficult to ignore. You can feel how carefully optimism is being managed. No one wishes to invite disappointment. No one wishes to discourage hope. The community occupies a middle ground between expectation and caution. It is a position learned through necessity. Too much confidence can be painful. Too little can be equally dangerous. The balance itself becomes a form of endurance. Throughout history, those who survived long ordeals often demonstrated this quality. They learned how to carry hope lightly enough that it could survive disappointment, yet strongly enough that it continued providing direction. The afternoon drifts onward beneath a bright sky. Birds appear again. Not many. Just enough to be noticed. One rests briefly upon floating debris before continuing toward the same distant horizon. Another passes overhead carrying a confidence of movement that seems almost enviable. Unlike the survivors, it knows exactly where it is going. The observation inspires quiet reflection. Birds belong to a larger world. A world containing coastlines, islands, ships, and destinations. Their presence serves as a reminder that the ocean, however immense it feels, is connected to places beyond sight. Memory and imagination respond immediately. Some survivors begin picturing shorelines. Others imagine harbors. Conversations drift toward home once more. The appearance of external signs encourages thoughts of external destinations. The mind naturally bridges the distance. Yet practical realities remain. Water must still be managed. Energy must still be conserved. The future remains uncertain. The signs may prove meaningful. They may not. As the sun lowers toward the horizon, the survivors continue drifting through waters that appear much as they did before. Nothing definitive has occurred. No rescue vessel has arrived. No coastline has emerged. No certainty has replaced uncertainty. And yet something has changed. The world feels slightly larger than it did yesterday. The horizon feels slightly less empty. Possibility has returned to the conversation. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to matter. And for those who have spent so many days surrounded by uncertainty, that alone carries weight. The following morning begins much like the ones before it. Light spreads gradually across the water. The horizon emerges from darkness. The sea resumes its familiar rhythm beneath the raft. For a few moments, it seems entirely possible that the observations of the previous day will fade into memory like so many others. Then someone notices a sound. At first, it is little more than a faint interruption carried by the wind. The survivors pause. They listen. The sound disappears. Conversation resumes. Several minutes later it returns. This time more people hear it. The difficulty lies in identifying its source. Open water alters sound in unusual ways. Distances become deceptive. Noise travels across the sea differently than it does on land. A distant engine may seem nearby. A nearby disturbance may seem distant. Certainty remains elusive. Yet attention has already shifted. The possibility of external contact changes perception. Every unusual detail now receives greater scrutiny. Survivors who had learned to manage expectations carefully find themselves listening more closely than before. Not because they have abandoned caution, but because hope, once awakened, naturally seeks confirmation. The sound comes and goes throughout the morning. Sometimes it seems stronger. Sometimes it vanishes entirely. The survivors continue with routine, though concentration occasionally drifts toward the horizon. Supplies are checked. Watches are maintained. Responsibilities are fulfilled. Yet beneath these familiar activities runs a current of anticipation. You can sense how different this feels from earlier days. The horizon no longer represents only absence. It now contains questions. Questions are not answers, certainly, but they create movement within situations that have become defined by waiting. The mind responds immediately. Possibilities expand. Scenarios emerge. Rescue, once imagined in abstract terms, begins acquiring shape. The sea itself remains indifferent. Waves continue their endless procession beneath the raft. Clouds drift overhead. Wind shifts according to patterns unconcerned with human hopes. Nature provides no indication that anything significant may be approaching. The survivors must interpret incomplete information while surrounded by a world that offers few explanations. By midday, visual observations begin accompanying the sounds. A distant shape appears along the horizon. No one reacts dramatically. Experience has taught restraint. The survivors have seen many shapes before. Clouds, reflections, atmospheric distortions. The ocean possesses countless ways of creating illusions. Yet this shape behaves differently. It remains visible. It changes position slowly. It does not dissolve when observed carefully. People watch in silence. The shape remains far away. Too far for certainty, yet close enough to command attention. You observe the remarkable discipline developed during the ordeal. Earlier in the drifting, such a sight might have produced immediate celebration. Now the response is more measured. Hope has matured. It no longer rushes ahead of evidence. The survivors understand the emotional cost of premature conclusions. Still, anticipation spreads. Not because anyone declares rescue certain. Because possibility has become increasingly difficult to dismiss. The hours that follow feel unusually long. Time, which often seems suspended during the ordeal, suddenly acquires urgency once more. Survivors monitor the distant shape repeatedly. They compare observations. They prepare signaling equipment. Tasks that had become routine now carry renewed significance. Signal mirrors are inspected. Bright materials are positioned where they can be deployed quickly. Attention remains focused outward. The raft community, so long occupied with maintaining itself, begins orienting toward something beyond its own boundaries. This shift produces subtle emotional changes. Conversations become more animated. Fatigue remains present, but it no longer dominates every interaction. The possibility of rescue alters posture, tone, and attention. Human beings respond powerfully to the suggestion of approaching change. Yet uncertainty persists. The shape remains distant. Clouds occasionally obscure it. Atmospheric conditions complicate observation. Hours pass without definitive confirmation. The survivors continue occupying the difficult space between hope and knowledge. You watch how carefully they manage this tension. No one wishes to surrender to fantasy. No one wishes to abandon optimism either. The balance maintained throughout the ordeal continues serving them well. It prevents despair during uncertainty. It prevents recklessness during possibility. As afternoon light begins softening, the distant shape grows slightly clearer. Not enough to identify. Enough to encourage belief. The horizon that once appeared empty now seems inhabited. Something exists out there. Whether it is a ship, another raft, or some atmospheric illusion remains uncertain. Yet the simple fact of observing change carries significance. The survivors have spent so long adapting to continuity that disruption itself feels extraordinary. Meanwhile, practical realities remain. Water is still rationed. Energy is still conserved. The body still bears the marks of exposure. Hope has not erased hardship. It has merely altered the context in which hardship is experienced. The sun begins descending toward evening. Golden light spreads across the sea. The distant shape remains visible, though still frustratingly indistinct. The survivors continue watching as carefully as they have watched anything during the entire ordeal. Night will arrive eventually. Darkness may conceal whatever lies beyond the horizon. The possibility is difficult to ignore. Yet something important has already occurred. The world beyond the raft has announced its existence. Not clearly, not conclusively, but undeniably. And as the day moves toward its close, the survivors find themselves facing a condition they have not experienced for many days. Not certainty. Not rescue. Expectation. A fragile, cautious expectation carried across open water by distance, light, and the possibility that the long period of drifting may finally be approaching its end. The shape in the distance. Night passes more slowly than usual. The survivors have experienced many nights since the sinking. Nights of uncertainty, storms, exhaustion, and waiting. Yet this darkness feels different. The possibility glimpsed upon the horizon during the previous day remains unresolved. No answer arrived before sunset. No certainty emerged from the fading light. Instead, the question survived the night. That question accompanies every watch, every period of rest, and every glance toward the darkness beyond the raft. What was it? The sea offers no immediate response. Waves continue their patient movement beneath the survivors. Wind brushes across the surface. Clouds drift where they please. Somewhere beyond sight, the wider world continues its own activities, unconcerned with the hopes concentrated within a handful of drifting rafts and lifeboats. Eventually dawn begins its familiar work. The eastern horizon brightens. Darkness retreats. Shapes emerge gradually from shadow. The survivors, many already awake, turn their attention outward almost immediately. Routine remains important. Supplies still require inspection. Responsibilities still exist. Yet no one can ignore the question that survived the night. Eyes move repeatedly toward the horizon. The first hour reveals little. Distance remains stubborn. Atmospheric haze blurs details. The ocean preserves its secrets. Then, slowly, something appears. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. A shape. The same shape. The object that occupied so much attention the previous day remains present. More importantly, it occupies a different position. The movement is subtle, almost impossible to detect in a single glance. Yet over time it becomes unmistakable. The shape is changing relative to the horizon. You watch the survivors recognize this fact one by one. Some notice immediately. Others require additional time. Eventually the observation spreads throughout the community. Something is moving. The realization introduces a different quality of anticipation. A stationary object invites speculation. A moving object invites interpretation. The survivors begin studying the distant shape with renewed concentration. They compare observations. They discuss possibilities. The conversation remains measured, but it grows increasingly focused. Movement suggests purpose. Purpose suggests connection to the wider world. The wider world, after so many days of absence, suddenly feels less distant. Still, caution remains. Experience has taught valuable lessons. Maritime history contains countless accounts of misidentification. Clouds resemble ships. Ships resemble clouds. Atmospheric conditions distort perception. The survivors understand these realities. Many have spent years at sea. They know how easily distance can deceive. Yet the evidence continues accumulating. The object remains visible. Its position changes gradually. Its outline appears more consistent than any cloud formation. Hour by hour, uncertainty yields small portions of ground to possibility. Meanwhile, the sea itself seems unusually calm. Not perfectly calm. Open water rarely is. Yet compared to previous days, conditions feel gentler. The raft rises and falls with familiar rhythm. Sunlight spreads across broad stretches of water. The environment appears almost welcoming, as though temporarily setting aside the hardships it has imposed. Such moments occur throughout survival narratives. Nature does not follow emotional logic. Calm often arrives after difficulty. Beauty appears alongside hardship. The ocean remains capable of producing extraordinary serenity even while testing those who drift upon it. The survivors notice these details. Many accounts describe heightened awareness during such periods. Colors seem sharper. Sounds seem clearer. Ordinary observations acquire significance. Hope influences perception, not by creating illusions, but by increasing attention. A seabird passes overhead. Several survivors follow its path longer than they might have days earlier. A change in light reflects across the water. People observe it carefully. Every detail feels connected to a larger possibility. You can sense how expectation alters the atmosphere within the raft community. The routines remain intact. Water is still managed. Energy is still conserved. Responsibilities are still fulfilled. Yet beneath these familiar activities lies a growing awareness that circumstances may soon change. Human beings possess an extraordinary ability to prepare emotionally for futures that have not yet arrived. The survivors are doing exactly that. Some imagine rescue openly. Others remain more guarded. Both responses are understandable. Hope carries risks. Disappointment carries risks as well. The balance between them remains delicate. As the morning progresses, the shape becomes slightly clearer. Still distant. Still frustratingly vague. Yet increasingly difficult to dismiss. The horizon that once appeared empty now contains evidence of something beyond the raft itself. Something moving through the same world from which the survivors have felt separated for so long. The psychological effect is profound. Isolation depends partly upon perception. 4 days, the survivors have inhabited a reality defined by separation. The appearance of an external presence, however distant, begins altering that reality. The world feels connected again. Not fully. Not yet. But enough to matter. The sun climbs higher. The object remains. The raft drifts onward beneath a bright sky. And for the first time since the sinking, the possibility of rescue feels less like imagination and more like a question awaiting an answer. As the day advances, the object upon the horizon slowly acquires definition. The process is almost frustratingly gradual. Every few minutes the shape appears unchanged. Every hour reveals something slightly different. The survivors continue observing because there is little alternative. Attention returns again and again to the same point where sea meets sky. Eventually, certain possibilities begin falling away. It is not a cloud. Clouds alter shape too quickly. It is not a fixed feature of the horizon. Its position continues changing. The object belongs to the moving world. That alone carries enormous significance. You watch how carefully the survivors respond to this realization. No one wishes to announce certainty prematurely. Experience has made them cautious. Yet even caution cannot entirely conceal the shift occurring within the raft community. People begin preparing in earnest. Signal mirrors are checked repeatedly. Bright materials are placed within easy reach. Individuals discuss how best to attract attention if the object draws nearer. The routines established during the ordeal suddenly reveal another purpose. The discipline that preserved survival may now assist rescue. 4 days, perhaps weeks depending on the particular ordeal, the raft has functioned as a self-contained world. Now it begins orienting outward. The distinction is subtle, but important. Attention moves beyond maintenance and toward communication. The possibility of being seen becomes almost as important as the possibility of seeing. This concern appears frequently in maritime survival accounts. Rescue is not merely a matter of proximity. Ships pass one another at sea without notice. Aircraft overlook objects resting upon the water. Visibility matters. Timing matters. Chance often plays a role. The survivors understand this. Hope, therefore, carries an edge of anxiety. The object may approach. It may pass beyond sight. It may notice them. It may not. Possibility remains accompanied by uncertainty. The hours stretch onward beneath bright sunlight. The sea appears vast as ever, yet no longer feels quite so empty. The simple knowledge that something moves beyond the horizon changes the emotional landscape. Isolation begins loosening its hold. You can sense this in the conversations. Voices carry more energy. Stories about home return with renewed frequency. Future events are discussed more openly. Not because rescue is guaranteed, but because the imagination now possesses evidence upon which to build. Human beings often endure hardship by maintaining a relationship with the future. During the darkest phases of the ordeal, that future existed primarily within memory and hope. Now it appears to have acquired a physical presence somewhere beyond the waves. The object continues approaching. Slowly, patiently, at the pace of distance itself. As afternoon light begins softening, details emerge that would have seemed impossible to distinguish earlier. The outline suggests structure. Straight lines appear where clouds would show only irregular forms. Reflections flash intermittently from its surface. A vessel. Perhaps. The word remains unspoken by some. Spoken cautiously by others. No one wishes to tempt disappointment. Yet the possibility grows increasingly difficult to deny. The sea, which for so long acted as a barrier, now seems to function as a connection. The same water carrying the raft may also be carrying whatever approaches. Currents, weather, and geography suddenly feel less abstract. They become part of a larger system linking the survivors to the world beyond their isolation. Meanwhile, physical exhaustion remains present. Hope has not restored strength. Thirst has not vanished. Exposure continues exerting its influence. The survivors still carry every mark of the ordeal. This contrast creates a peculiar emotional state. Relief begins appearing before suffering has ended. Anticipation exists alongside fatigue. The future seems closer while hardship remains immediate. Many survivors later describe such moments with remarkable clarity. Not because rescue had already occurred. Because possibility itself can be transformative. A person drifting upon the open sea may endure tremendous hardship. Yet the sight of a distant vessel changes how that hardship is experienced. The same thirst feels different. The same fatigue feels different. Circumstances remain unchanged, yet meaning begins shifting. You watch the survivors navigate this transition carefully. They continue performing routine tasks. They continue conserving resources. They continue preparing for the possibility that disappointment may still lie ahead. The habits developed during the ordeal remain valuable. Indeed, they become more valuable than ever. As evening approaches, the object remains visible. Larger now. Still distant. Still not close enough for certainty. Yet undeniably present. The horizon no longer separates the survivors from the world. It connects them to it. The sun descends toward the western sea, casting long paths of gold across the water. The approaching object moves slowly through that light, emerging from abstraction into reality 1 hour at a time. Night will come again. Darkness may obscure details once more. The survivors know this. Yet they also know something else. For the first time since the sinking, evidence exists that their isolation may not be permanent. The realization settles quietly across the raft community. No celebration erupts. No emotional climax arrives. Only a deepening awareness that the world beyond the horizon has drawn nearer than it has been for many days. And as the light fades across the sea, the survivors prepare for one more night of waiting. A different kind of waiting now. Not waiting for rescue to exist. Waiting to discover whether it is truly coming toward them. The return of the world. The final night of uncertainty is not necessarily the most difficult. In some ways, it may be the strangest. The survivors have spent so long adapting to isolation that the possibility of its end introduces its own form of tension. Sleep remains elusive. Watches continue as before. The sea moves beneath the raft with familiar rhythm. Yet thoughts no longer drift only toward endurance. Increasingly, they drift toward transition. What happens if the vessel is real? What happens if it sees them? What happens if this chapter of existence finally closes? Such questions accompany the survivors through the darkness. The answers remain hidden beyond the horizon, waiting for daylight. When morning finally arrives, it feels different from the others. Not because the sea has changed. Not because the sky has changed. Because expectation has changed. The horizon emerges from darkness carrying significance it did not possess before. Eyes turn toward it almost immediately. Some survivors have barely slept. Others wake with the same thought already present. The shape remains. Larger now. Clearer. Still distant enough to resist certainty, yet close enough that imagination is no longer required to explain its presence. Something is there. The realization settles across the raft community with quiet force. 4 days, perhaps longer, the survivors have existed within a world defined by self-reliance. Their routines, relationships, and responsibilities evolved because no external assistance appeared. Now another reality begins entering that world. Contact. The return of connection. The return of other human beings. You watch how attention shifts accordingly. The horizon becomes the center of activity. Signal equipment is positioned carefully. Bright materials are arranged where they can catch sunlight. Discussions become practical. If the vessel approaches, what should be done first? Which signals should be used? How can visibility be maximized? Preparation transforms anticipation into action. This is important. The survivors have endured uncertainty by focusing upon tasks within their control. That habit remains valuable now. Rather than surrendering entirely to hope, they continue working. Activity provides structure. Structure prevents anticipation from becoming overwhelming. The sea remains calm enough to assist them. Sunlight reflects brightly from the water. Visibility is good. Conditions favor observation. Yet even under ideal circumstances, distance remains deceptive. Hours pass before meaningful changes become obvious. The vessel approaches according to its own timetable, indifferent to the emotional significance attached to its movement. The waiting continues. Only now it possesses direction. You can feel how different this is from earlier forms of waiting. Previously, the future felt abstract. Rescue existed as a possibility without shape. Now it possesses form. It occupies a specific location upon the horizon. The survivors are no longer waiting for something imagined. They are waiting for something observed. The psychological effect is profound. Energy begins returning in unexpected ways. Fatigue remains, yet it no longer dominates every thought. Attention focuses outward. The mind, so long occupied with endurance, begins preparing for change. Conversations reflect this shift. People speak about practical matters. Medical attention. Fresh water. Food. Families. Ports. Home. Subjects that once belonged entirely to imagination now feel connected to reality. The future begins extending beyond the boundaries of the raft. Meanwhile, the vessel continues drawing nearer. Slowly enough to test patience. Quickly enough to sustain hope. Its outline becomes increasingly distinct beneath the morning sun. Structures emerge where earlier only shapes existed. Movement becomes unmistakable. The survivors no longer debate whether something is there. The question has changed. Now they wonder whether it will see them. This concern introduces a final layer of uncertainty. History contains many accounts of near rescues and missed opportunities. Ships passed beyond sight. Aircraft failed to notice signals. Circumstances aligned imperfectly. The survivors know these stories. Some may have witnessed similar events during their maritime careers. Hope therefore remains accompanied by caution. The possibility of disappointment has not disappeared. Yet neither has determination. Signal mirrors flash toward the horizon whenever conditions allow. Bright materials are raised. Attention remains focused outward. Every available method is employed because the opportunity, however uncertain, is too important to ignore. You watch the raft community operate with remarkable coordination. The ordeal has shaped them into something more than a collection of individuals. Shared hardship created habits of cooperation. Responsibilities developed through necessity. Trust emerged through repetition. Those qualities now serve a final purpose. The community that formed to survive may also help secure rescue. As midday approaches, the vessel occupies a larger portion of the horizon than ever before. Still not close. Not yet. But undeniably part of the survivors' world. The sea stretches between them. Distance remains. Uncertainty remains. Yet the long isolation of drifting has begun yielding to something else. The return of possibility. The return of contact. The return of a wider human world that never disappeared, only moved temporarily beyond reach. And beneath the bright sky of another day at sea, the survivors continue watching, signaling, and waiting as the boundary between endurance and rescue grows thinner with every passing hour. The first unmistakable sign arrives through movement. Not the movement of the vessel itself. That has been visible for hours now. Rather, it is a change in behavior. A subtle alteration in course. An adjustment so slight that it might go unnoticed by an untrained observer. Yet among the survivors are individuals who have spent years at sea. They understand how ships move. They understand how courses are held and how courses are changed. Someone notices. Then another. The observation spreads quietly. The vessel appears to be turning toward them. No one speaks with certainty at first. Distance remains considerable. Atmospheric conditions still distort perspective. Yet as the afternoon unfolds, the evidence becomes increasingly difficult to dismiss. The vessel is no longer simply crossing the horizon. It is behaving as though something has attracted its attention. You watch the survivors process this realization. Hope rises. Caution remains. Both exist simultaneously. The emotional balance maintained throughout the ordeal is tested one final time. Human beings naturally want certainty. Yet experience has taught restraint. The survivors continue preparing signals even while allowing themselves to believe that those signals may have been seen. The sea between raft and vessel begins shrinking. Slowly. Almost imperceptibly. Yet undeniably. The vessel grows larger. Details emerge. Superstructure. Masts. Equipment. Features impossible to distinguish only a day earlier now become visible. The approaching ship transforms from abstraction into reality. With that transformation comes a curious shift in perception. The raft suddenly feels smaller. For days it has functioned as an entire world. Its routines governed daily existence. Its boundaries defined experience. Now another scale enters the picture. The sight of a distant ship reminds the survivors how tiny their floating community truly is within the wider ocean. At the same time, it reminds them how large the wider world remains. The two realizations arrive together. The vessel continues approaching through afternoon light. Signal mirrors flash. Pieces of bright fabric wave above the raft. Arms rise. Voices carry across distances far too great to hear. Every action reflects the same hope. See us. The plea requires no words. Throughout maritime history, countless survivors have directed that silent message toward passing vessels. Sometimes the answer came. Sometimes it did not. The uncertainty surrounding visibility remains one of the defining characteristics of survival at sea. Today, however, evidence continues accumulating. The vessel maintains its altered course. Its approach appears deliberate. The survivors begin allowing themselves to imagine outcomes that once seemed remote. Fresh water. Medical treatment. Shade. Solid decks beneath their feet. The absence of constant vigilance. Simple things. Ordinary things. The ordeal has transformed such experiences into luxuries. You can sense how memory and anticipation begin merging. Earlier chapters were filled with recollections of home and routine. Those memories now feel less distant. The future begins reconnecting with the past. Life beyond the raft appears possible once more. Yet even now, the sea demands patience. Hours remain. Distance remains. The ocean does not surrender its survivors quickly. As afternoon fades toward evening, the vessel finally reaches a range where visual confirmation becomes possible. People can be seen moving aboard it. Human figures. Small. Distant. Yet unmistakably human. The effect is extraordinary. For so long, the survivors have existed within a world limited to their own community. The appearance of unfamiliar people creates an emotional response difficult to describe fully. It represents more than rescue. It represents reconnect evidence that society still exists. Evidence that the world beyond the horizon remained real throughout the ordeal. Evidence that isolation may finally be ending. The raft community responds with renewed energy. Signals continue. Attention remains fixed upon the approaching vessel. Every movement aboard the ship acquires significance. A person walking along a deck. Someone pausing near a railing. A change in speed. Each observation becomes part of a larger narrative unfolding in real time. You watch the survivors occupy a threshold between two realities. Behind them lies the world of drifting. The world of rationing, weather, exposure, memory, and endurance. Ahead lies something different. Not yet rescue. Not yet safety. But contact. The first bridge between isolation and return. As the sun lowers toward the horizon, golden light spreads across both sea and ship. The vessel appears larger than ever before. Its presence dominates the survivors' attention completely. The distance separating them continues narrowing. The outcome has not been fully secured. Not quite. Yet the balance has shifted. For many days, uncertainty held the advantage. Now possibility does. The raft rises and falls gently upon evening swells while the approaching vessel moves steadily through fading light. Around them, the ocean remains vast and indifferent as it has always been. But for the survivors, the world has begun returning. 1 mile. 1 wave. 1 glimpse at a time. The hand reaching across the water. The final distance proves difficult to measure. Not because it is especially great, but because perception changes when an ordeal approaches its conclusion. Hours that once blurred together now seem unusually detailed. Small developments acquire significance. Attention focuses upon every movement of the approaching vessel. The survivors continue watching. The vessel continues approaching. The sea continues moving beneath them. Yet the relationship between those elements has changed. For many days, the ocean functioned primarily as separation. It divided the raft from rescue, certainty, and the wider world. Now the same water serves as connection. The vessel travels across it. Signals travel across it. Hope travels across it. The transformation is subtle, but profound. As the ship draws nearer, details become increasingly clear. The shape of its hull. The arrangement of equipment upon its decks. The movement of crew members carrying out their duties. These observations possess unusual emotional weight. The survivors are not merely seeing a vessel. They are seeing evidence of organized life. Structure. Routine. Purpose. Things that disappeared when the ship sank. You watch how carefully they study these details. A person standing at a railing becomes important. A crew member moving between stations becomes important. Ordinary activities acquire extraordinary meaning because they belong to a world from which the survivors have been temporarily separated. The raft community remains focused and disciplined. Experience has taught caution until the very end. Signals continue. Equipment is secured. Preparations are made for whatever may follow. Rescue operations at sea require coordination. Even hopeful outcomes demand practical effort. The vessel's crew appears to understand this. Changes in movement become visible. Individuals gather in certain areas of the ship. Equipment is positioned. Activity increases. From a distance, the exact details remain difficult to distinguish, yet the overall pattern is unmistakable. The vessel has seen them. The realization spreads quietly. No declaration is required. The behavior of the ship communicates the message clearly enough. For many survivors, this moment remains among the most memorable of the entire ordeal. Not the instant of rescue itself. The instant of recognition. The instant when uncertainty regarding visibility finally disappears. Someone knows they are here. Someone is coming. The emotional significance is difficult to overstate. 4 days, perhaps longer, the survivors have existed within a condition defined by self-reliance and uncertainty. They adapted because they had no alternative. They built routines because routine supported endurance. They maintained hope because hope provided direction. Now another human community enters the story. The isolation that shaped every chapter of the ordeal begins loosening its grip. You can feel the atmosphere aboard the raft changing. Relief appears cautiously. Fatigue becomes more visible. People who maintain composure through remarkable hardship begin allowing themselves to relax, if only slightly. The body often postpones certain reactions until safety seems possible. Exhaustion hidden beneath routine starts emerging. The sea itself appears unchanged. Waves continue rolling beneath the raft. Wind continues crossing the water. Clouds continue drifting overhead. Nature remains indifferent to human milestones. Yet the survivors perceive the environment differently now. The same horizon that once symbolized absence now symbolizes arrival. The same ocean that concealed uncertainty now carries assistance toward them. As afternoon light spreads across the water, the approaching vessel occupies a growing portion of the survivors' world. Voices may still be too distant to hear. Details may remain incomplete. But contact has already occurred in the most important sense. Mutual awareness exists. The survivors know the ship is there. The ship knows the survivors are here. Everything that follows emerges from that simple fact. Meanwhile, practical realities continue asserting themselves. The body remains exhausted. Injuries remain present. Thirst remains real. Exposure has not suddenly vanished. Rescue does not erase hardship immediately. Rather, it begins the process of ending it. The distinction matters. You watch the survivors navigate this transition carefully. Some focus upon preparations. Others remain absorbed by observation. A few seem almost reluctant to believe fully in what is happening. Such reactions are entirely natural. Human beings who endure prolonged uncertainty often require time to adjust when circumstances finally change. The vessel continues drawing closer. The distance narrows. Details sharpen. The wider world, absent for so long, now approaches across open water with every passing minute. And as the raft rises and falls beneath a bright sky, the survivors find themselves standing at the edge of a threshold that once seemed unimaginably distant. The threshold between endurance and relief. Between isolation and connection. Between drifting and return. As the vessel closes the remaining distance, the scale of the moment becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. The survivors have spent so many days adapting to the dimensions of the raft that the approaching ship appears almost enormous. Its hull rises above the water. Equipment becomes clearly visible. Individual crew members can now be distinguished without difficulty. What once seemed distant and uncertain has become immediate and real. The contrast is striking. One world consists of limited supplies, exposed canvas, and carefully rationed resources. The other consists of machinery, shelter, fresh water, medical facilities, and organized support. The distance between those worlds can be measured in only a few hundred yards. Yet it has taken days of endurance to cross. You watch the final stages unfold with a calm that reflects the nature of maritime rescue itself. There is no sudden dramatic reversal. No instant transformation. Instead, there is procedure. The vessel slows. Crew members move into position. Lines are prepared. Instructions are signaled. The habits of organization and routine that disappeared with the sinking now reappear from another direction. For many survivors, this return of structure carries its own emotional weight. 4 days, responsibility rested almost entirely within the raft community. Every decision mattered. Every resource required management. Every uncertainty demanded patience. Now trained crews assume part of that burden. Systems larger than the raft once again become available. The transition begins quietly. A line reaches across the water. Hands receive it. The connection seems almost symbolic. Throughout the ordeal, the survivors remained linked to the wider world through memory, hope, and imagination. Now a physical connection exists. Rope stretches across the sea, joining two communities that only hours earlier occupied separate realities. You can sense the significance of such simple acts. Human beings often imagine survival stories ending with dramatic moments. Yet many survivors later remembered quieter details instead. The sound of a crew member's voice. The sight of a uniform. The feeling of solid equipment being handed from one person to another. Ordinary interactions suddenly felt extraordinary because they represented return. The raft community responds with remarkable composure. The ordeal has shaped them. Days of uncertainty encouraged patience. Days of routine encouraged discipline. Days of cooperation encouraged trust. Those qualities now assist the rescue itself. People help one another. Instructions are followed carefully. The habits developed during drifting remain useful until the very end. Meanwhile, the sea continues moving beneath both vessels. Waves strike hulls and rafts alike. Wind crosses open water. Clouds drift overhead. Nature offers no ceremony for the conclusion of the ordeal. It simply continues. Perhaps there is something fitting about that. The ocean never promised disaster. It never promised rescue. It merely provided the environment in which both became possible. One by one, survivors begin crossing the final boundary between drifting and recovery. The process is rarely elegant. Exhaustion makes movement difficult. Injuries complicate simple tasks. Bodies weakened by exposure require assistance. Yet every successful transfer represents more than physical relocation. Each one marks the end of a condition that has defined daily existence for an extraordinary length of time. You watch survivors step onto decks that feel impossibly stable. The sensation can be disorienting. 4 days, perhaps longer, life has been governed by the motion of the sea. Muscles learned to compensate automatically. Balance adapted to uncertainty. Now solid footing returns. The body must remember what certainty feels like. Fresh water appears. Shade appears. Medical attention appears. These things seem ordinary aboard the rescue vessel. To those arriving from the raft, they feel remarkable. Not because they are luxurious. Because they are available. The value of ordinary necessities often becomes fully visible only after their absence. As evening approaches, the raft that served as a temporary world begins losing its central role. It remains afloat. It remains visible. Yet its purpose has been fulfilled. The community it sheltered is moving elsewhere. This transition often produces unexpected emotions. Relief, certainly. Gratitude. Exhaustion. Sometimes sadness as well. Human beings form attachments to environments that sustain them through hardship. The raft represented danger and discomfort, yet it also represented survival. Leaving it behind means leaving a chapter of experience that, however difficult, became deeply familiar. The survivors now belong to a different world once more. A world of engines, schedules, crews, and destinations. A world connected to ports, cities, families, and futures. The return is not complete. Recovery will require time. Memories will remain. The ordeal will continue influencing those who lived through it. Yet the essential transition has occurred. The period of drifting has ended. The wider world has returned. And as the rescue vessel turns toward its destination beneath the fading light, The ocean stretches outward in every direction exactly as it did before. Vast, indifferent, beautiful. The same sea that carried destruction. The same sea that carried endurance. The same sea that ultimately carried rescue. Years later, many survivors would struggle to explain exactly how time behaved during those days upon the water. Certain memories remained sharp. The sound of rain striking canvas. The sight of birds crossing the horizon. The glow of sunlight upon evening waves. Other details faded. Dates blurred. Distances became uncertain. Yet one truth often endured with remarkable clarity. The ordeal was never defined by a single dramatic moment. Not the sinking. Not the storm. Not even the rescue. Instead, it was defined by accumulation. One sunrise after another. One ration after another. One decision after another. The sea taught lessons rarely encountered elsewhere. It revealed how much of ordinary life depends upon structure that often goes unnoticed. Fresh water from a tap. A roof overhead. A predictable meal. The presence of other people. Such things can appear ordinary until absence transforms them into treasures. You can still find echoes of those experiences in memoirs, interviews, and recollections gathered decades later. Survivors often spoke about endurance, certainly. Yet they also spoke about cooperation, about routine, about patience, about the quiet determination required to continue functioning when certainty disappears. Perhaps that is why drifting occupies such a distinctive place within the history of conflict. Battles are often remembered through action. Drifting is remembered through waiting. And waiting reveals different aspects of human character. The ocean remains unchanged. Ships still cross vast distances. Storms still gather beyond distant horizons. Birds still travel between worlds of sea and land. The conditions that shaped those survival stories continue existing today, just as they existed long before the conflicts that produced them. Yet somewhere within those endless waters lingers another truth. Human beings are remarkably capable of adapting. They build routines where none exist. They create communities in unlikely places. They preserve hope without certainty. They endure. As evening settles across the sea, the horizon glows briefly before fading into darkness. The waves continue their patient movement beneath the last light of day. Far beyond sight, countless journeys continue across the water. Some are remembered. Most are not. But for those who drifted between loss and rescue, the ocean became more than a setting. It became a teacher. A reminder of fragility. A reminder of resilience. And a reminder that even in the largest and loneliest places on Earth, human beings rarely endure entirely alone. The light fades. The horizon disappears. The sea remains. And somewhere beyond the darkness, the world continues turning, wave after wave, toward another dawn. You've been part of Echoes of War, where stories rise on quiet wings, and the past still circles above us, refusing to land.